His name was Walter Coleman, and on that gray morning in Springfield, Missouri, no one imagined that something extraordinary was about to unfold. Walter looked like just another elderly man from the countryside, the kind who blends into the background of any American town. His simple clothes told the story of decades of hard work on the land. Old boots marked by dried mud, thick pants faded by the sun, a neatly pressed but clearly worn plaid shirt, and a battered hat he always removed when entering a closed space, out of respect. His face carried deep lines, not of worry, but of a life built on silence, discipline, and careful choices. He walked slowly, leaning on a simple wooden cane he had carved himself years earlier, and his eyes observed everything around him with a calm, steady attention. The bank in front of him was modern, all glass and steel, recently renovated, with slogans about prosperity and the future printed across its walls. Walter took a deep breath before going in, not out of nervousness, but out of habit. He always breathed deeply before important decisions, even when he already knew exactly what he was going to do. The moment he stepped inside, the contrast became obvious. The shine of the floor reflected expensive suits, luxury leather bags, and hurried expressions. Employees spoke in low voices, important clients were greeted by first name, and everything seemed to operate at a rhythm far removed from the simple life Walter lived. A few glances landed on him for just a second, long enough to judge him and then dismiss him. Walter joined the line and waited in silence, as he had done his entire life. When his turn came, he was assisted by Mark Reynolds, an assistant manager accustomed to dealing with large numbers, but only when they arrived alongside confidence, sharp suits, and polished shoes. Mark greeted Walter with automatic politeness, barely lifting his eyes from the computer. He asked what Walter needed, already expecting something minor. Walter removed his hat, held it with both hands, and said he needed to talk about a loan. The word itself did not surprise Mark, but the unusual calm in the old man's voice caught his attention for a brief moment. Still, he kept his professional tone and asked for the amount, already preparing himself for something modest. Walter paused briefly, not to build suspense, but because he always chose his words carefully. Then he said quietly and firmly, "It's not a small amount. It's $8 million. For a second, Mark thought he had heard wrong. The sounds of the bank seemed to fade around them. Mark let out a short, involuntary laugh, quickly disguising it as a cough. He looked at Walter again, now with a mix of surprise and disbelief, and asked if he was serious. Walter simply nodded, his expression unchanged. Mark immediately shifted posture, moving from polite to defensive. He began explaining rules, requirements, financial history, guarantees, using technical language as if speaking to someone who wouldn't understand the basics. As he spoke, he was already planning how to end the conversation politely. Walter listened without interrupting, until he did something unexpected. He thanked Mark for the explanation and asked if he could speak with the general manager, because this matter could not be handled there. The quiet firmness in Walter's voice made Mark hesitate. Something didn't add up. Against his own instinct, he called the manager. Susan Whitaker arrived minutes later, elegant and confident, with a gaze trained to assess risk. Before even hearing the amount, she had already formed silent conclusions. Walter repeated the sentence exactly as before. $8 million. Susan didn't laugh, but she didn't believe it either. She asked him to follow her to a private room. Inside, she requested documents, proof, anything that could justify such a conversation. Walter slowly opened an old leather folder, very different from the modern portfolios seen there every day. Inside, there was no disorder or improvisation. There were land purchase contracts acquired decades earlier, investments made when no one believed in that region, silent stakes in agricultural companies, records of continuous leases, and profits reinvested consistently over 40 years. As Susan reviewed the numbers, the atmosphere in the room changed. One analyst was called in, then another. The figures didn't just check out, they revealed something far greater. Walter Coleman didn't need a loan at all. He had enough assets to cover that amount many times over. The request for $8 million wasn't out of necessity. It was strategy. When Susan realized this, the real shock set in. Walter calmly explained that the loan wasn't meant to buy anything for himself. He wanted to test the bank. He wanted to see how he would be treated before his family trust transferred a much larger sum to the institution in the coming months. He explained that he was about to sell part of his land to a major international agricultural group, and that the transaction would exceed tens of millions of dollars. The silence was absolute. The bank that had underestimated a simple old man had nearly lost the largest financial movement the region had seen in years. Susan understood in that instant that the mistake was not in the numbers but in the initial judgment. Walter stood up, put on his hat, and thanked them for their time. He said he would still consider whether that bank was truly the right partner for someone who valued respect above any interest rate. He walked out of the room with slow, steady steps, leaving behind executives in shock. That day, Springfield learned a quiet lesson. Some of the greatest fortunes in the world wear worn boots, speak little, and never feel the need to prove who they are.